The Galactic Council chamber was a grandiose spectacle of arrogance. Suspended in the void of deep space, the Imperial War Nexus gleamed with artificial luminescence, a monument to 1,000 conquered worlds. Inside, a collection of the most powerful beings in the Empire sat around a hovering tactical display, their many eyes, tendrils, and appendages fixated on the holographic projection of an unremarkable, forest-covered planet, Valhalla 9. High Marshal Drekvok, a hulking, reptilian brute with gleaming obsidian scales and a voice like grinding metal, drummed his claws against the table. Humans, he scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. A primitive, stubborn breed, barely a step above vermin. The assembled officers and strategists chuckled in agreement. They have no energy shields, no bioenhancements, no neural synchronization. And yet they persist. This came from Admiral Zilroth, a gelatinous mass of shimmering blue tendrils who communicated through pulsating light waves. His body jiggled slightly with what could only be amusement. Their tactics are antiquated, added strategist Rancor, a towering insectoid with iridescent wings. Kinetic weapons for Star's sake. Slugs propelled by chemical explosions. And their soldiers? Still hiding behind rocks and trees like primitive ambush predators. Our scanners will detect them before they even take aim. More laughter rippled through the chamber. It was almost too easy. The humans had resisted, of course. They always did. But no amount of stubbornness could overcome the simple reality of technological inferiority. Drekvok exhaled through his slitted nostrils, shaking his head. Their reliance on. He waved a claw in the air, as if shooing away a pest. Camouflage is particularly amusing. As if our spectral sensors will be fooled by bits of fabric and mud. An aide, a smaller reptilian with a nervous twitch, cleared his throat. Sir, there are reports of irregularities. In previous encounters, soldiers have described taking casualties from unseen assailants. Targets dropping without a trace of the shooter. Drekvok's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? The aide hesitated. That perhaps they have developed an advanced cloaking technology? The room erupted in laughter. Someone actually pounded the table. A tentacled officer wiped tears from his eye stalks. Humans? Zilroth wheezed. With superior stealth technology? Oh, that's delightful. Yes, Rancor chittered. And perhaps they can bend space-time with their mammalian brains while they're at it. Drekvok waved dismissively, his amusement souring. Enough! The humans' tactics are irrelevant. Our forces will advance on Valhalla 9 and crush them within days. No theatrics, no drawn-out engagements, just overwhelming force. An affirming chorus followed. The meeting concluded with unanimous agreement. The battle was already won. The humans were simply too backward, too primitive, too human to pose any real challenge. Sergeant Elias Carter adjusted the mesh netting over his face and suppressed a grin as he listened in on the intercepted alien transmission. Primitive, he murmured, glancing at his squad. They're calling us primitive again? Next to him, Corporal Vasquez smirked, her face streaked with mud and sweat. They also think camouflage is useless. Guess we'll have to educate them. Elias lifted his sniper rifle, the matte black surface disappearing seamlessly against the thick foliage. His ghillie suit, woven with adaptive fibers, blurred his outline against the jungle. The aliens could laugh all they wanted. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The jungle of Valhalla 9 was alive with sound. Insects buzzed, unseen creatures rustled in the underbrush, and somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily from the dense canopy above. Yet beneath all of that natural noise, there was something else, a slow, rhythmic tremor in the ground. Marching, heavy boots. The Empire was coming. Sergeant Elias Carter lay perfectly still, his body molded into the terrain like he had been born from it. His ghillie suit, laced with adaptive fibers, blended seamlessly with the vegetation. A few feet away, Vasquez shifted ever so slightly, her form disappearing into the mossy undergrowth. The rest of the sniper team was similarly invisible, positioned in perfect silence, rifles poised like coiled vipers. Through the scope of his rifle, Elias spotted the first wave of alien soldiers advancing, a squad of Zelrati shock troopers, their crimson armor glinting in the dappled sunlight. They moved with the confidence of conquerors, weapons humming with lethal energy, their elongated heads swiveling as their sensory arrays swept for threats. They wouldn't find any. This is almost sad, Vasquez muttered through their encrypted comms. They're walking in like it's a parade. Elias exhaled slowly, adjusting his grip on the trigger. Arrogance is a hell of a drug. At the front of the formation, a Zelrati officer barked something in their guttural language, ordering a halt. His 4 eyes scanned the treeline. The alien was massive, even for his species, clad in ornate battle armor that signified rank. That one looks important, Elias whispered. Vasquez hummed in agreement. Would be a shame if something happened to him. Elias lined up his shot. The wind was still. The distance, 482 meters. Gravity adjustments minimal. His finger tightened, the rifle barely making a sound as it sent a tungsten-tipped round screaming through the air. The Zelrati officer's head snapped backward as a fine mist of deep blue sprayed from the exit wound. He crumpled instantly, his massive form hitting the ground like a toppled statue. For a full 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. The shock troopers scrambled, barking commands, their weapons swiveling in every direction. They fired wildly into the trees, searing bolts of plasma cutting through leaves and charring bark. But they weren't firing at anything, just the overwhelming presence of their own fear. Elias allowed himself a smirk, and the dance begins. A lieutenant, distinguished by a streak of silver running along his carapace, shouted orders in a panicked tone. Scanners! Find them! One of the troopers activated a spectral scanner, a device meant to cut through optical illusions and heat distortions. It pulsed once, sweeping over the jungle. Nothing. Another pulse. Still nothing. The lieutenant's mandibles twitched. Vasquez's voice was dripping with amusement. You'd think they'd have figured it out by now. Give them a minute, Elias said. They're slow learners. Another shot rang out, and another Zelrati soldier crumpled. The jungle remained silent, undisturbed, as if the planet itself had simply decided to start plucking them from existence. The survivors bunched together, switching tactics. Deploy the drones. A trio of hovering orbs launched from the formation, scanning the jungle with advanced motion detection, thermal imaging, and electromagnetic resonance. Elias waited, heartbeat steady. The drones passed overhead. No alarms. No signals. The Empire's finest technology, and it was blind as a newborn. The lieutenant's fear was almost palpable now. He motioned to the trees, ordering his troops to spread out. Sweep the area. Burn them out if you have to. Wow, Vasquez murmured, her voice carrying a note of admiration. He's got some survival instinct. Not enough, Elias replied. He took the next shot. The lieutenant's chest cavity exploded outward, and the remaining soldiers froze, caught between panic and disbelief. Their leader hadn't even flinched before being erased from existence. One of the younger Zelrati broke ranks and bolted. A second later, 2 of his comrades followed suit. Vasquez snickered. First signs of intelligence we've seen all day. The remaining soldiers turned in their last desperate act of defiance, firing into the jungle in one final, undisciplined barrage before retreating into the undergrowth. It was a slaughter. The few who survived left behind their dead, their confidence, and their sanity. Elias pulled away from his scope, letting the silence settle. That went well, Vasquez remarked. Yeah, Elias agreed, watching the last stragglers vanish into the jungle. But they'll be back. Vasquez grinned. Good. I was starting to get bored. The jungle was patient. It did not care for war or victory, only survival. The same could be said for Elias Carter. Hours had passed since the first engagement, and the Zelrati had returned, this time in greater numbers. More drones, more firepower, more frustration. They stomped through the undergrowth, the weight of their desperation almost as heavy as their armored boots. Elias remained motionless, his body half submerged in the damp earth, breathing slow and measured. His rifle, cradled in his arms, was steady. The scope gave him a clear view of the enemy, but he didn't fire. Not yet. Vasquez's voice crackled over comms, hushed and amused. I think they're mad at us. Elias allowed himself a ghost of a smirk. You don't say. Below them, Commander Dralvek, a stocky brute covered in segmented exoplate, bared his fangs at his subordinates. His 4 nostrils flared as he gestured wildly at the jungle. Where are they? They must be using distortion tech. Scan again. A soldier adjusted a device on his wrist, sending another scanning pulse through the trees. The machine whined, pulse blew, then faded. No targets. Dralvek let out a low growl. Impossible. Elias could almost feel the aliens' frustration through the scope. They really can't wrap their heads around it, Vasquez whispered. That's the thing about sniping, Elias murmured. It's a mind game. They think they're fighting an enemy they can see. We don't play by those rules. Dralvek turned, eyes scanning wildly, and barked a new order. Torch the jungle. Burn them out. Elias's smirk faded. Well, that's inconvenient. Plasma throwers ignited, sending waves of fire through the thick foliage. Trees cracked and withered, their leaves shriveling into ash. The Zelrati soldiers moved methodically, burning everything in their path, flushing out anything that might be hiding. Time to move, Vasquez murmured. Elias inched backward, his movements slow and deliberate. One mistake, one snapped twig, and the entire enemy force would turn their weapons in his direction. He slid through the mud, Gilly's suit coated in layers of grime. The firelight flickered in the distance, painting the jungle in shades of orange and black. A branch creaked. Not his. His breath stilled. Something was close. A Zelrati soldier, separated from his squad, was scanning the area with a cautious step. His rifle swung back and forth, scanning, searching for the ghosts that had haunted his battalion. Elias pressed himself against the jungle floor. He could smell the acrid tang of plasma in the air, feel the heat radiating from the burning foliage nearby. The soldier stopped just 3 feet from him. Vasquez's voice whispered in his ear. You got this? Elias's fingers tightened around his knife. A gunshot would be too loud, too risky. He waited, heartbeat steady. The Zelrati's foot shifted, his weight beginning to turn. Elias lunged. One swift motion, one clean strike. The blade slipped between the gaps in the alien's armor, severing something vital. The soldier convulsed once, then slumped forward, his body soundlessly absorbed into the jungle floor. Elias exhaled. Handled. Vasquez made a thoughtful noise. You're terrifying. You know that? Let's keep moving. The jungle was no longer just a battlefield. It was a shifting, dying thing, flames carving it apart piece by piece. The Zelrati pressed forward, unaware of the true nature of their fight. Elias reached a new vantage point, positioning himself beneath a fallen tree. His rifle nestled against his shoulder, scope finding Dralvek once more. The commander was pacing now, his movements rigid with fury. They can't fight what they can't see, Elias murmured, aligning his shot. Dralvek turned just as the trigger squeezed. A single, perfect shot. The commander's body seized before he crumpled like a marionette with cut strings. Silence. Then panic. Elias let the chaos unfold, exhaling slowly. The game wasn't over yet, but they had just taken another piece off the board. The jungle had become a graveyard. The Zelrati had entered as conquerors, but now they moved like prey, their heads snapping at every sound, weapons trembling in their hands. The once proud alien warriors were broken by something they couldn't see, couldn't predict, something that moved like a ghost and struck like a vengeful god. Elias Carter watched them from the shadows, adjusting the netting over his face. His ghillie suit, now caked with soot and damp earth, made him just another part of the dying jungle. The flames had pushed him and Vasquez further back, but the fire had done more damage to the enemy's morale than their own. The Zelrati had expected a fight. Instead, they had been handed a horror story. Vasquez's voice crackled in his earpiece. You seeing this? Yeah. Elias scanned the remnants of the enemy force through his scope. They were scattered, disorganized. Their formations had dissolved into small, desperate clusters of survivors. Some clung to cover like terrified hatchlings, others shot blindly into the trees. It was almost unfair. Almost. Elias's rifle settled on a particularly nervous-looking soldier, his mandibles clicking anxiously. The alien was gripping his plasma rifle, so tight his claws were digging into the metal. Elias exhaled. One shot clean through the chest. The alien dropped without a sound. The remaining Zelrati erupted into chaos, shouting in their guttural tongue, scrambling for cover that wouldn't save them. Vasquez chuckled. That one almost jumped out of his exoskeleton. They're done, Elias murmured. They just don't know it yet. Another squad of aliens pushed forward, trying to rally under the command of an officer, one of the last still maintaining some illusion of control. He gestured sharply, barking orders to regroup. Vasquez sighed. Ugh! Another one, trying to play hero. Elias lined up his shot. Not for long. The officer barely had time to blink before the bullet found him. He collapsed, his body twitching once before going still. This time, there was no hesitation. The Zelrati didn't scatter in confusion or scramble for a counterattack. They ran. Some dropped their weapons entirely, tearing through the jungle in wild, uncoordinated panic. Others fired as they retreated, plasma bolts cutting aimlessly through the trees. None of them stayed to fight. Well, Vasquez mused, watching the rout unfold. I think that qualifies as a breaking point. Elias allowed himself a smirk. Took them long enough. In the distance, the Zelrati command ship, a towering monolith of alien arrogance, began a slow ascent. They were leaving. Their forces had been shattered, their leadership reduced to blue stains on the jungle floor. The Empire had underestimated camouflage, underestimated human patience, underestimated them. Vasquez nudged Elias with her boot. So, do we send them a farewell gift? Elias adjusted his scope one last time, locking onto a fleeing officer who had nearly reached the evac zone. Yeah, he said, pulling the trigger. Wouldn't want them to forget us. The jungle was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that came from fear or waiting, but the natural stillness that followed a storm. The Zelrati were gone, their retreat so hasty that they left behind weapons, supplies, even their dead. The mighty Empire had come to Valhalla, not expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had fled, their ranks shattered, their confidence broken. Elias Carter sat on a fallen log, rifle resting across his knees. His ghillie suit was damp with sweat, soot, and mud, but he barely noticed. Across from him, Vasquez stretched her arms above her head, rolling her shoulders with a satisfied sigh. Well, she said, that was fun. Elias snorted. You have a weird definition of fun. Come on. We just made an entire battalion of elite alien warriors run screaming into the night. That's hilarious. She wasn't wrong. The Zelrati weren't just any soldiers. They were some of the best the Empire had to offer. And yet, against a handful of human snipers, they had crumbled. Elias had seen what fear did to soldiers. It stripped them of their discipline, turned them from warriors into something feral, something desperate. The Zelrati had expected a fight. What they got was something worse. I bet they're telling stories about us already, Vasquez continued. Somewhere out there, a Zelrati general is demanding to know how an entire battalion lost to an enemy they never even saw. Elias smirked. Let them wonder. He could imagine it now. Whispers spreading through the ranks. Rumors of the invisible death that lurked in the jungles. Soldiers refusing to deploy on planets where humans had been spotted. Officers scanning the trees with nervous eyes, jumping at shadows. The Zelrati wouldn't just remember what had happened here. They would fear it. Think they'll be back? Vasquez asked. Elias considered it. The Empire wasn't known for accepting defeat gracefully. But this wasn't just a loss. It was humiliation. Maybe they would come again, armed with new tactics, new technology, something to counter the ghosts that had hunted them through the trees. Or maybe they'd decide it wasn't worth it. He shrugged. If they do, we'll be here. Vasquez grinned. Damn right. She pulled a ration bar from her pack, biting into it with exaggerated enthusiasm. So, she said between chews, think we'll ever get a medal for this? Elias chuckled. Yeah, right after the brass officially acknowledges that we existed. That was the thing about sniper teams. When they did their job right, nobody ever knew they were there. And maybe that was for the best. Metals didn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. But the legend? The fear? That would last. Somewhere in the vast reaches of space, an alien officer would brief his troops about human warfare, his mandibles clicking anxiously as he warned them about the dangers of fighting an enemy they couldn't see. And somewhere, on some distant battlefield, a Zelrati soldier would hesitate before stepping into a jungle, heart pounding, scanning the trees, wondering if a human sniper was already watching him. Elias smiled. Let them wonder.